Let's go, Qualcomm.
Yeah, so Qualcomm, net, I mean, it's just a bunch of records, right? Record
Boom.
revenue, record non-GAAP EPS, record handset, record automotive, and with a really good guide. And then, Wall Street rewarded them with a sell-off, right? And my gosh, it took me so long to figure out what was going on. But it was two things. I guess they were actually related, right? It was sequential decline in QCT handsets due to seasonality and Apple. And then Skyworks laid an egg related to Apple. And then essentially they just got completely caught up in that. And unfortunately, all the great accomplishments that they had, investors forgot about. I would have thought for sure, given their guide, because what we've seen so far the previous week is that all these companies had really good quarterly earnings, and then they had this shaky guide, right? But Qualcomm came in with a really, really good guide. So handset growth really driven by the new Snapdragon 8 Elite platform. And essentially, this is the chip that outperforms Apple's Bionic on most tests out there. Samsung just brought out their latest S25. They did a full sweep there. And then a lot, obviously, automotive is still cranking, and automotive was up 61%. IoT was up 36%, and that's pretty staggering numbers when you pull back on it. Some of the questions, right, that came up during the analyst call that I listened to, QTL guidance. I know there was some chatter about, hey, we thought that would be bigger. Why haven't you guys closed Huawei? Pretty used to that stuff. One of really, I thought, exciting announcements that Qualcomm made on Snapdragon PCs were the market share numbers. And essentially it said that they had 10% Copilot Plus PCs in US retail. And, I think that's really good. First of all, it's going, I think the biggest they'd ever hit was like 1 or 2%. So this was a big number. The other thing was that they did this at the same time that the Microsoft Windows goodies, most of the goodies that people were looking forward to, hadn't even shipped. So all in all, really solid earnings. And if it weren't for catching the Apple cold related to Skyworks, I think the company's stock price would have been a lot higher.
Yeah, Pat, I think you hit a couple of good points. You dove into the details. I continue to zoom out at the Qualcomm business, and you look, record, was it QCT 10 billion? That's the non-licensing part of the business. For a long time, those numbers between licensing and the technology were a lot closer. They just did, the diversification did not span beyond mobile and handsets. And during the time since CEO Cristiano Amon took charge, after we kind of got through this period of time with all the lawsuits, every FTC on the planet trying to take down Qualcomm, you had Apple, then you had the Broadcom takeover. And it was a little history lesson, but the history was the company had a lot of sort of headwinds that were slowing its innovation and its ability. Well, when Cristiano came in, he's much more product centric than CEOs of the past that were much more kind of the legal law related. Mollenkopf was definitely focused on getting through that period of time. When Cristiano came in and said, look, we don't want to just be a handset company. We want to this connected intelligent edge is what he called it. But what he really meant by this is we're going to go from handsets to cars to PCs to IoT and VR, AR, XR. So the product diversification. And so when you look at the business, right, it's like are they on the right trajectory? If I'm an investor, is this where I would want to be looking at a company in terms of its direction?
Yeah.
It's pivoted off some of its dependencies on Apple. Of course, when you look at the Apple number, you got to remember Qualcomm still makes money on that too. And this is the cool part about the business with the patents and licensing is even if no Qualcomm technology is actually in the phone, there's still licensing that would drive certain amounts of revenue attached to the continued sale of iPhones. That's what makes businesses like this pretty cool. But look at like automotive, Pat. We didn't really talk about it, but it's running really close to $1 billion a quarter in revenue now. We've talked a lot about that $50 billion pipeline. But so you would say, have they successfully pivoted to automotive? I would actually argue that they sort of took the moment where NVIDIA went all in on data center, and they sort of took a lot of that sort of momentum they had in automotive. Now, I know NVIDIA is going to get back focused on that again now, but that was a really big move. They took a lot of design pipeline. They're driving a lot of revenue there. They got into this PC space. You mentioned the 10% of retail, but they're making good product. I mean, it's a good competitive product. And I think that third competitive product in the market is really important. And to your point, the actual real best use cases for an AI PC are still really pretty nascent. So now what we have is lower power, higher performing, very lightweight, good looking devices that have the opportunity now to add a lot of new revenue streams. So when I look at the overall business for Qualcomm, I would say they've succeeded in the mission. And the mission was not to be dependent 100% on handsets. Also, one last thing I'll note is they have kind of an interesting China outlook.
Yeah.
They're very dependent on China, but they also benefit from the fact that all the different handset makers use Qualcomm technology.
That's right.
And so if there's tariffs and a ban and it becomes more nationalistic and, the Oppos and Xiaomi's become the bigger volume and Apple actually moves out, that could actually be an advantage to Qualcomm.
Totally.
If Apple actually continues to cede market share in China. And by the way, then you add the Samsungs and others that they don't ship from here. They're not U.S. products and they're not shipping. So they're like, out of Vietnam? So anyway, the point is like there's a kind of this interesting tailwind that could come from what most people are seeing as a more difficult macro situation. So I look at all that and I say it's a pretty good time to be invested in Qualcomm, and the company's made a lot of progress.